Game director Yasumi Matsuno began his career at a development company called Quest that produced games on multiple platforms from the NES to the Sega Saturn. There, he originated the Ogre Battle series that started with March of the Black Queen in 1993. He also designed Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together for the PlayStation, and the strategy franchise would release 3 additional games without his supervision. In 1995, Matsuno left Quest to join Square, and began production on a title encompassing the grid-based combat and job-leveling party structure Ogre Battle had previously made famous. Abandoning Ogre's kingdom of Valeria, this new endeavor had to take place in another world, a land Matsuno named Ivalice. Gamers first set foot on its world map in Final Fantasy Tactics, released in Japan 5 months after Final Fantasy VII. Tactics was welcomed into the Final Fantasy fold by project producer Hironobu Sakaguchi and designer Hiroyuki Ito. Akihiko Yoshida designed the characters after working with Matsuno on both Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre. The score was composed by Masaharu Iwata and Hitoshi Sakamoto. The story in Tactics was told by the historian Al-Islam, who sought to understand and communicate the events that led to the Lion War. Following a 50-year conflict and the death of the king, a race began to fill the throne of Ivalice. Prince Goltana of the Black Lion clan strove to install Princess Ovelia as Ivalice's true ruler, while Prince Larg of the White Lions supported the yet-of-age Prince Orinas, believing him to be the rightful heir. Amid the tumultuous political landscape was a boy named Ramza, from the noble Beowulf family, a young and naive aristocrat who would later become a mercenary. In the opening battle, he failed to protect Ovelia and witnessed her being kidnapped by his childhood commoner friend Delita Hyrule, who was previously presumed to be dead. With nothing left to believe in, Ramza embarked on a journey to recover the princess and uncover Delita's intentions. The quest would be wrought with political deceit, religious turmoil, demons, and the mysterious power of 12 Zodiac Stones. Unlike other series spin-offs, Tactics employed a battle scheme that was completely unique to the franchise. The skirmishes were still turn-based, but along with selecting an active ability, players had to be conscious of where their forces were placed on the battlefield. A blue highlighted area represented the boundaries of each character's movement, and their attack order was determined by a charge time meter. Each battle assigned you a different number of party members, but the team total always surpassed 4, sometimes encompassing 6 or more, a series first. While the fighting was a departure from what fans were used to, the class system in Tactics was a classic upgrade from Final Fantasy V. Squire and Chemist were the base jobs, evolving into warrior and mage roles respectively. Black mages were called wizards, white mages were dubbed priests, and dragoons went by lancers, but the jobs monk, archer, time mage, summoner, dancer, bard, samurai, ninja, and geomancer remained intact. And along with new professions Oracle, Mediator, and Calculator, there were 9 unique job classes that belonged to the several special characters that joined your ranks, from the sharpshooting engineer Mustadio to the fetching holy knight Agrias. The overworld map was completely linear, and random battles only took place when your crew passed through designated green waypoints on the path. Towns could only be accessed through a menu interface, with available options including accepting side quests, buying new equipment, poaching monsters, and recruiting new party members. Despite being created outside of the core series, Tactics still retained many Roman numeral niceties. Chocobos were still the preferred method of travel, though only in battle and in cutscenes. Cid appeared as Cidolfus T.G. Cid Orlandu, a knight and hero of the 50-Year War, who joined Ramza and his crew under the player's discretion. Even Cloud Strife himself stumbled into the story, complete with a convenient case of amnesia, and a stock of familiar-looking limit breaks, given that you found his materia blade, of course. While Tactics was slightly obscured by the wake of 7, it's still one of the most revered titles to bear the Final Fantasy name. The gameplay was considered gloriously diverse, the job system endlessly adjustable, and the graphical detail in the environments and attacks some of the best on the system. About the only thing that was universally disliked about Tactics was the patchy English translation, which led many gamers and reviewers to become disconnected with the plot. But the story wasn't over, and gamers would soon return to Ivalice, whether they knew they were doing so or not. Vagrant Story was released in Japan on February 10, 2000. The one-man dungeon runner didn't have Final Fantasy in its title or even in its subtext, but took place around the kingdom of Valendia, which rested in a continent north of the expanded Ivalice from future games. The story followed Ashley Riot, an agent for the VKP, or Valendia Knights of the Peace, and his new inexperienced partner Calo Merlos. While relentlessly chasing a religious fanatic and cult leader named Sidney Losterod, Ashley frequently crossed paths with the Crimson Blades, an arm of the Cardinals Knights of the Cross, and their leader Guildenstern. The aim of the story's villains was to achieve immortality by harnessing a force known as the Darkness, a plague which had laid waste to Leamon and turned its victims into the Walking Dead. Vagrant Story was more of an action affair, but it was still full of careful tactical brawls and highly customizable weapons. Enemy encounters opened up a wireframe battlesphere, and anything inside it was deemed close enough to strike or shoot. Weapons could be disassembled, gems could be infused, and magic spells or enchanted attacks could be recalled from Ashley's tortured and fragmented memory. At its release, Vagrant Story was not compared to Final Fantasy titles because its vague relation was not yet realized, but several elements made the action-adventure stand above its contemporaries. Its script was a vast improvement over Tactics. It delved into religious tones that Square previously extinguished when localizing its games, and the comic book-inspired art style was a departure from other fantasy projects on the PlayStation. Six years after the release of Tactics, gamers were taken back to its ever-transforming realm in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance in 2003. With the exception of Matsuno and Sakamoto returning, the design team was new to Ivalice and to Final Fantasy. The never-ending story of Tactics Advance was quite different from others in the saga. It told of four children, Marsh, Ritz, Moot, and Donid, who lived in the quiet mountain town of contemporary Saint Ivalice, each with their own insurmountable set of hurdles. After stumbling across a battered book that turned out to be an ancient magical tome known as the Grand Grimoire, which was a prominent item in Vagrant Story, the children fabricated a fantasy world based on their personal challenges and boundless imagination. Advance harkened back to a number of conventions introduced in Tactics. The maps, locales, and graphical touches were basically in the same style as the original, but the battle and job systems were also similar with some minor or distinct changes. Tactics Advance introduced Ivalice to a number of new races that would become mainstays of the realm: the reptilian Bonga, the mystic Numu, the spiritual Viera, and of course, friendly Mughals. Instead of one circle of jobs that all characters could choose from, each race now had their own circle that comprised its own selection of unique jobs, as well as variations on previous standards. Like in Tactics, some jobs became available after certain conditions were met, and different abilities could be swapped once they were mastered. The battle system retained its turn-based roots, subtly incorporating aspects of the new job improvements. Movement and order were still a major tactical factor, as well as the positioning and timing of abilities. The most significant change in the pace of battles was the inclusion of laws that restricted various abilities that could be used in each encounter. Each skirmish was presided over by a judge who maintained the laws of the battleground. Laws varied and could range from being a simple nuisance to an incredible hindrance. Characters that broke the laws of the engagement were warned, and if multiple infractions occurred, penalized or even jailed. Obeying the laws and staying on the favorable side of the judges awarded characters with judge points that could be cashed for a number of different uses. Eventually, with the help of the haughty know-it-all Ezel, players could combat the iron fist of the judges with law cards and anti-law cards. Law cards allowed players to add laws in the hopes of restricting enemy abilities, and anti-law cards canceled out existing law cards in play. The only areas of Ivalice that remained free of the judge's jurisdiction were dangerous zones known as the Jagd, which is German for the hunt. Upon arriving in Ivalice, Marsh was met by the Mughal Mont Blanc, who introduced him to clans and their respective wars. Marsh had the option to name his clan and help it to grow and prosper throughout the course of the game. Rival clans often challenged him for supremacy and competed in various tournaments. The clan itself consisted of all the characters the players had amassed. Different members could come and go as the missions were completed, and be dispatched on singular missions for loot, items, and other spoils. The world map of Tactics Advance was certainly the most malleable of the series, allowing for the player to customize the landscape with different area icons. Placing specific areas near others occasionally unearthed treasures that could be plundered by searching the zone. Cid played dual roles in Advance, first appearing as Moot's father in St. Ivalice. As an unemployed drunk, his persona was a polar opposite from his position of Judge Magister and husband to the Queen, when the kids made the crossover through the grimoire. Tactics Advance also introduced the world of Ivalice to a number of mysterious otherworldly guardians, first known as Totema. In addition to the pantheon accessible by the traditional Final Fantasy summoner, the Totema were powerful beings that could be called forth to damage all enemies on the battlefield. Each race had its companion totem that could be summoned when a character attained 10 judge points. These games showed followers of the Final Fantasy franchise yet another world to absorb, one that was stacked with plot layers and hidden connections for those that persistently played all three. But for those that dismissed them as spin-offs, and bypassed Final Fantasy XI for its multiplayer sacrilege, only one thing mattered: the true single-player follow-up to Final Fantasy X. Unbeknownst to this impatient army, the release date of the next core Final Fantasy, which started development in 2001, would be delayed a series record 4 times. This created a development gap of 4 agonizing years, the longest fans ever waited for another installment. Matsuno was originally assigned to direct the project, but bowed out in the summer of 2005 due to health reasons. Gamers waited and hoped. Final Fantasy XII was released in Japan on March 16, 2006, and crossed the shores to North America in October of the same year. Although Final Fantasy XII's Ivalice was most similar to the Ivalice in Tactics Advance, the majority of the design team from the original Tactics and Vagrant story returned. Matsuno's duties were split between Hiroyuki Ito and Tactics art director Hiroshi Minagawa. Akihiko Yoshida designed the characters, and Hitoshi Sakamoto composed the score. Series legends Yoshitaka Amano and Nobuo Uematsu had very little to do with 12, contributing basically the title logo and theme song, respectively. Told through the eyes of the bright youth Vaughn, 12 followed the plight of the dethroned princess Ashelia of Dalmasca and her pilgrimage to reclaim her birthright and right the wrongs inflicted upon her homeland by the ever-expanding Arcadian Empire, led by the aging Emperor Grom's and his ruthless, power-hungry son Vayne. After the murder of her husband and prince of a neighboring kingdom, Ashe went into hiding under the guise of suicide. When the Empire eventually captured her kingdom of Dalmasca and Vayne was appointed consul, she chose to hide no longer. Vaughn and his surrogate sister Penelo embarked on a number of misadventures that put them in the paths of the foppish sky pirate Balthier, his Viera companion Fran, and the disgraced Captain Bosch, who is believed to have assassinated Dalmasca's King Ramenas over the fateful treaty signing with the Empire. Eventually, the upstarts joined with the resistance led by Ashe's uncle, the Marquis Ondor, ruler of the opulent sky city of Bujerba. In addition to his opposition to the Empire, Andor was also responsible for compiling a collection of memoirs that served as a structural narration throughout the progression of 12, similar to Al-Islam's role in Tactics. 12 also sported a number of supporting, non-playable characters that had detailed and well-developed personas and intricate backstories. Among them were the Little Lord Larsa, heir apparent and younger brother of Vane, the steadfast Judge Gabranth, Bosch's zealous twin brother, and the swashbuckling Redis, notorious sky pirate and patron of the town of Valfenheim. In a reversal from his usual helpful nature, Cid was one of the party's many adversaries in 12, as a megalomaniacal scientist responsible for building Arcadia's airship fleet. Two of 12's system breakthroughs were truly milestones for the series. 12 marked the first time a solo 3D world could be manipulated with a free-roaming camera. This allowed the player to have full range of motion and vision for the characters at all times. In addition, a new battle system was designed to accommodate a more immediate and intuitive playstyle, similar to the online engagements of Final Fantasy XI. 12 introduced active dimension battles, which eliminated random encounters completely. All enemies were now visible and subject to rules of aggression. Although characters could be controlled manually, 12 incorporated a macro-like system for inactive characters called gambits, which allowed them to act on their own in real time based on a number of criteria. As different sections of the gambit formula were purchased or found, more complex gambits could be made. This allowed for fast and fierce battles that required very little downtime. Vaughn and his compatriots added their experience to a leveling system called the License Grid. Tying to the theme of law and judgment, the License Grid required characters to purchase permissions to use different spells, weapons, and armor. Characters still increased in level, although abilities were acquired solely through obtaining licenses. Regardless of the experience total certain enemies yielded upon death, the license points awarded were relatively standard, making the grind for abilities painless. However, due to certain plot restrictions relating to when certain abilities could be obtained or purchased, grinding license points sometimes became futile and unnecessary. The Ivalice of 12 maintained many concepts of Tactics Advance, which was the first time two Ivalices bore apparent similarities. The new races introduced in Advance returned in more intricate and expansive capacities. Judges played a very large role in 12, and several areas, such as the Yags, were explored or referred to. Mont Blanc also made a side appearance as well, as the leader of Clan Centurio, which aided Vaughn in his monster hunting endeavors. Mont Blanc's appearance also solidified that the timelines of 12 and Tactics Advance were relatively close, Tactics Advance likely being the prequel. Another aspect of Advance that carried over was the introduction of a completely new pantheon of summonable creatures, known as Espers. 12 marked the first time a given term was repeated to describe summoned creatures, as well as the first time in the numeric series, since summoning was introduced, that featured a totally different group of mystical beings. Shiva, Ifrit, and Ramu were replaced with Madius, Belias, and Adramelech, among others. Elemental strengths became less of a focus, as each Esper corresponded with the sign of the zodiac. Each Esper needed to be bound to a given character. Once selected, the choice could not be undone. In addition to the pure strength of the summoned creature, the characters could also unleash quickenings, powerful chain attacks that drew upon their mystical energy.
Should Empire join with Empire, the way will open for a new Ivalice in our time.
12 continued to move forward and refine Final Fantasy's voice acting. Extremely long pauses, odd vocalizations, and other glitchy elements were drastically minimized. The voices were brought down from the exaggerations of 10 and given a more legitimate tone. Even more heavy hitters in the voiceover community continued to flesh out the cast. John DiMaggio, who lent his talents to 10 as well, was followed by fellow Futurama alumnus Phil Lamar, who brought life to Redis. As part of the 20th anniversary celebration, 12 was given a brief makeover for its international release in August of 2007. The license grid was replaced with the Zodiac job system, which required characters to choose one of 12 smaller grids that corresponded to a particular job and sign of the Zodiac. Guest characters and Espers could now be controlled by the player. New Gambit spells and licenses were incorporated, and a new Game Plus feature was added, similar to Final Fantasy X-2. It's unknown whether the release calendar of the 4 Ivalice games so far is indicative of the chronological telling of Ivalice's story. Tactics takes place on a peninsula closed in by the land of Ordalia to the east. Vagrant's story runs through the city of Leamond, and continually references the kingdom of Valendia. Tactics Advance is hard to assimilate geographically in the timeline because the map is constructed by the player. The Ivalice 12, however, included both Valendia and Ordalia with minor spelling adjustments, despite the fact that the locations within them completely changed. It also contained several locations plotted in Tactics Advance. This led fans to assume that the block of land in the original Tactics sits on the west rim of the 12 map, possibly revealing that the Ivalice in the first PlayStation game expanded across several continents while growing over time into the overworld on the PS2. Several facts both support and destroy this theory. The bestiary in Final Fantasy XII was compiled by a woman with the last name Merlos, who might be a relative to the heroine in Vagrant's story, or Callow herself. And several of the items in Vagrant's story allude to characters from Tactics in Return. But according to Tactics, Mughals are extinct, so their inclusion in Final Fantasy XII might force the original Ivalice adventure to the end of the timeline. There are numerous theories, and none of them are correct until confirmed by the developers. But here's one we found the most interesting. Suppose Tactics and Vagrant's story were precursors to Tactics Advance, with the non-Mughal religious era eventually transforming into Saint Ivalice, similar to how Constantinople became Istanbul. Then, Moot and friends created an alternate Ivalice with their minds, one that added their favorite fantasy friends like Mughals, and new races like the Bonga and Viera. They eventually returned home, but what if this dream dimension lived on, and set the stage for Final Fantasy XII? The developers have confirmed several times that Tactics, Tactics Advance, Vagrant's story, and Final Fantasy XII all take place in the same world. But the order and relation of these chapters in Ivalice still remains a mystery. Hopefully, the sequels that have yet to be released will shed some light on the subject. In December of 2006, Square initiated the Ivalice Alliance, a series of titles all linked together by the continuing narrative of Matsuno's world. Its first entry, Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings, was released on April 26, 2007 in Japan. The DS RTS was unlike any previous FF release, handheld or otherwise, engaging the player in complex real-time face-offs with touchpad controls. Final Fantasy Tactics A2, another DS battle simulator, is currently under development and will be placed chronologically behind Final Fantasy XII. And a remake of the original PlayStation Crusade launched on the PSP subtitled The War of the Lions. The portable port featured new items, jobs, and full-motion cutscenes detailing major plot developments and boss encounters. However the 6 chapters in the saga of Ivalice eventually come together, the kingdom itself stands as the most expansive setting ever created in the Final Fantasy universe, and even more adventures could lie in waiting. The name Ivalice only vaguely represents a solitary region of its planet's surface, so as the Alliance marches on, there's no telling where it will end. Next week, we go beyond the franchise into the entities that sit at the edge of what's considered canon. These random experiments include a handheld adventure, a mystical quest, a surprisingly long string of chocobo trials, and the various franchise leaps from the small set to the silver screen.